Almighty and eternal God, who through Jesus Christ has revealed your glory to all nations, please protect and preserve Belize, our beloved country. God of might, wisdom, and justice, please assist our Belizean government and people with your Holy Spirit of counsel and fortitude. Let the light of your divine wisdom direct their plans and endeavors, so that with your help we may attain our just objectives. With your guidance, may all our endeavors tend to peace, social justice, liberty, national happiness, the increase of industry, sobriety, and useful knowledge. We pray, O God of mercy, for all of us, that we may be blessed in the knowledge and sanctified in the observance of your most holy law, and that we may be preserved in union in that peace which the world itself cannot give. And after enjoying the blessings of this life, please administer, dear Lord, to that eternal reward that you have prepared for those who love you.
Oath of allegiance of a new senator. Deputy Clerk, kindly administer the oath of allegiance to the new senator.
Left hand, right hand. I, Louis Luke Martinez, do swear that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Belize and will uphold the Constitution and the law, and that I will conscientiously, impartially, and to the best of my ability discharge my duties as senator and do right to all manner of people without fear or favor, affection or ill will. So help me God.
Congratulations to you, Senator Louis Luke Martinez, and welcome to today's sitting, or welcome back to the sitting of the Senate. Announcement by the President. Good morning. I have 3 announcements. First, I record our thanks to the people, government, and Parliament of Ghana for hosting us at the 66th Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's annual conference held in Accra, Ghana, October 30th to November 5th. I had the honor of chairing the panel on building independent parliaments, ensuring financial and administrative accountability, and to share Belize's experience on this important tenet of parliamentary autonomy. Belize's delegation included Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Valerie Woods, the Vice President of the Senate, Honorable Colette Montejo, Deputy Clerk, Ms. Clarita Petch, and myself. In addition, Vice President Honorable Colette Montejo and Deputy Clerk Clarita Petch and myself, as members of the CARICOM delegation, also had the honor of meeting the President of Ghana, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, to whom we conveyed greetings on behalf of our Head of State, Her Excellency Froilan Tizam, and the Prime Minister of Belize, Honorable Jan Brusenyo, and the people and government of Belize, and the Foreign Minister, the Honorable Amon Courtney. Second, I extend an invitation to all senators for 3 very important activities that are upcoming. The first, to join us on Tuesday, November 7th at 3 o'clock p.m. in front of the National Assembly building for the official ceremony with the Republic of China, Taiwan, on the record of donation for the renovation of the National Assembly of Belize. Second, to participate in the Climate Crisis Forum for Parliamentarians to be held on Thursday, November 9, 2023, at 10 a.m. to 12 noon at the auditorium of the Ministry of Climate Change, Sustainable Development and Disaster Risk Management. A save the date has already been issued for this. This has been organized by the National Assembly in participation with the Ministry of Climate Change, Sustainable Development and Disaster Risk Management, the United Nations Country Office, and Parl Americas. And third, to attend the Children's Parliament, which will be held on Friday, November 10th, 2023, in this National Assembly. Later today, we will be meeting with some of the youth parliamentarians who are here. I see 4 already in the gallery, but we do have some more coming. The third announcement is to inform that World Children's Day 2023 will be commemorated on November 28th. Under the theme, Children's Rights, Our Responsibility, Celebrating Diversity and Advocating for Every Child. The National Committee for Families and Children has asked the National Assembly and other organizations and institutions in Belize to light up our building in the color blue to symbolize our support for commitment to the cause. And that concludes my announcements. To just add, later on this morning, we will join our youth parliamentarians for a brief greeting and a photo opportunity. Honorable members, by letter dated 13th October 2023, Cabinet's recommendation has been signified to the following. 1. Trade Licensing Bill 2022. 2. Fiscal Incentive Bill 2023. And 3. Inter-American Development Bank Promoting Sustainable Growth in the Blue Economy Program US $7 million Loan Motion 2023.
Bill is brought from the House of Representatives.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to take charge of the following bills. Firearms Amendment Bill 2023, Trade Licensing Bill 2022, Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill 2023, and Referendum Amendment Bill 2023. Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order number 49-1, I move that the bills be taken through all their stages forthwith.
Honorable members, the question is that the bills be taken through all their stages forthwith. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Papers.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to lay on the table sessional papers number 71/1/14, the Development Finance Corporation's DFC Annual Report for the year 2022. Number 72/1/14, Belize Social Investment Fund Financial Statements for the year ended 31st March 2023. Number 73/1/14, Central Bank of Belize Annual Report and Statement of Accounts 2022, and number 74/1/14, Central Bank of Belize Revised Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for fiscal year 2023.
Honorable members, those papers are ordered to lie on the table.
Statement by Minister.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I am compelled to make a statement on behalf of the government of Belize concerning the latest conflagration roiling the Middle East. I am sure that all Belizeans have been glued in horror to their televisions and mobile devices since the 7th October 2023, when Hamas militants crossed into Israel and wreaked mayhem, killing some 1,500 civilians and injuring thousands more. Belize deeply regrets the loss of innocent lives of men, women, and children of several nationalities because of this operation. More than 200 innocent persons were captured and are being held hostage by Hamas. We demand their immediate and unconditional release. Whilst being held, they must be treated humanely and their dignity respected. Madam President, on Sunday, the 8th October, the State of Israel formally declared war on Hamas. That declaration of war obliges Israel to abide by and respect the laws of war. For the past 19 days, the world has watched in horror at the scale of Israel's indiscriminate attacks and unrelenting bombing of Gaza. To date, more than 6,000 Palestinians, including 2,500 children, have been slaughtered. A further 17,000 Palestinians have been injured. Targeting or recklessly wounding and killing defenseless civilians is barbaric. We all stand as witnesses as millions of Palestinians in North Gaza are forced by order of the Israeli government to run for their lives with nowhere to go. They are forced to leave behind their precious possessions only to see them destroyed by incessant bombing. 1.5 million innocent Gazans are now internally displaced. This forced displacement is a gross violation of international humanitarian law. The amount of explosives that have been dropped on Gaza exceeds 12,000 tons. That, Madam President, is equivalent to the size of the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Our collective conscience is shocked. Madam President, the Israeli siege of Gaza, intentionally depriving millions of the necessities to sustain human life in a civilized world: food, water, electricity, medicine. Deprived of electricity, water, and medicine, the healthcare system of Gaza has virtually collapsed. This is inhumane. Humanitarian assistance has started to trickle in, but not yet at the scale needed. The use of food as a weapon of war, leading to mass starvation, is a gross violation of international humanitarian law. The scale of the humanitarian crisis evolving in Gaza is unconscionable. The collective punishment of Palestinians by Israel is a war crime. As the occupying power, Israel is under an obligation to ensure that the basic needs of the residents of Gaza are met. This is the standard to be met in a civilized world. And we have not seen the end. This hell on earth created by Israel is to get worse. A ground invasion is imminent. The risk of a wider conflagration is real. Madam President, Israel is not above international law. As the United Nations Secretary General has repeated several times, quote, "Even war has rules," end quote. Those rules of war, international human rights and international humanitarian law, are being flagrantly violated by Israel. The declaration of war against Hamas is not a license to collectively punish innocent Palestinians. The siege and its effects, the unending and indiscriminate bombing and forced displacement of Palestinians, is wholly disproportionate. Such wanton violations of international law demand accountability for the perpetrators. The histories of Palestine and of Israel are as long as time itself. It is a complicated history weighted by religion, by war, by oppression, by geopolitics, by apartheid policies, by systematic violations of human rights, by impunity, by disregard for international law, by the appropriation of territory, and by occupation. Notwithstanding this complicated context, Belize's position is clear. We condemn the unjustified use of force and the killing of innocent civilians by both sides. We call for an immediate ceasefire. We call for the immediate release of all hostages. We demand that international humanitarian and human rights law be respected by all parties. We call for the safe, unimpeded access for adequate humanitarian support to Gaza. Madam President, Belize will never waver from its long-standing support for the Palestinian people to exercise their right to self-determination and for an independent Palestinian state within its 1967 borders, with all attendance rights, including the recognition of East Jerusalem as its capital and the right of return. The international community must act urgently to end this latest example of man's inhumanity to man. The UN Security Council cannot continue to fail the Palestinian people. The people of Israel and Palestine deserve to live in peace and security. Thank you, Madam President.
Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that at its rising today, the Senate do adjourn to a date to be fixed by the President.
Honorable members, the question is that at its rising today, the Senate adjourn to a date to be fixed by the President. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Public business, government business, motions.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that whereas the agreement establishing the Caribbean Customs Organizations and on mutual administrative assistance in custom matters, hereafter referred to as the agreement, was adopted in Havana, Cuba on 22nd May 2019 by the 41st Annual Caribbean Customs Law Enforcement Council Conference, and whereas the objective of this agreement is to achieve a balance between law enforcement, security, and trade facilitation requirements by focusing on high-risk goods to meet the needs of governments for the protection of society and revenue, as well as to ensure the least possible customs interference with logistics of legitimate trade flows. And whereas the government of Belize is desirous of acceding to the agreement pursuant to Article 60 of the agreement, and whereas Section 61A(2)(a) of the Belize Constitution provides that the Senate has the power to authorize the ratification, including adhesion or accession, of any treaty by the government of Belize. Now, therefore, be it resolved that this Honorable Senate authorizes the government of Belize to accede to the agreement establishing the Caribbean Customs Organization and on mutual administrative assistance in custom matters, a full text of which is hereto annexed.
Honorable members, that motion is referred to the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee for examination, consideration, and report. I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that whereas the agreement on the return or sharing of recovered assets, hereinafter referred to as the agreement, is grounded in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which established the CARICOM and the CARICOM Crime and Security Strategy, adopted by Conference of Heads of Government at its 24th intersessional meeting held in 2013, which underscored the importance of asset recovery as an effective tool against organized crime. And whereas the agreement was signed by the government of Belize in San Pedro and Burgess Key at the 33rd intersessional meeting of the CARICOM Heads of Government on 2nd March 2022, and whereas the object of the agreement is to combat crime comprehensively, especially corruption, money laundering, the trafficking of illicit drugs and illicit firearms, ammunition and explosives, the proliferation of small arms, ammunition and weapons of mass destruction, organized crime, cybercrime, trafficking in persons, and smuggling of migrants, as well as terrorism in all forms and manifestations, including its financing and other offenses. And whereas the government of Belize is desirous of ratifying the agreement pursuant to Article 16 of the said agreement, and whereas Section 61A2A of the Belize Constitution provides that the Senate has the power to authorize the ratification, including adhesion or accession, of any treaty by the government of Belize. Now therefore be it resolved that this Honorable Senate, having examined the said agreement, authorizes the government of Belize to ratify the agreement on the return or sharing of recovered assets, a full text of which is hereto.
Honorable members, that motion is referred to the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee for examination, consideration, and report. I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that whereas Belize, as a member of the Inter-American Development Bank, is eligible for development assistance in the form of loans, grants, and technical assistance from the bank on such terms and conditions as may be agreed between Belize and the bank from time to time. And whereas the government of Belize, in an effort to enhance the government's ability to sustainably manage key commercial species in the fisheries sector and promote the adoption of sustainable technologies and best fishing practices by artisanal fisherfolk, approached the Bank for Financial Assistance to finance a program to support sustainable growth in the blue economy, hereinafter referred to as the program. And whereas the program will consist of two components whose activities will, one, create an enabling environment for the sustainable and resilient management of fisheries sector, two, provide direct support to the sustainable development of the fish fishing industry, three, strengthen the sustainability and resilience of spiny lobster and queen conch fishing industries, four, provide direct support to the artisanal fisherfolk in Belize, and five, strengthen institutional capacity to improve data collection, management, and analysis of information from the fisheries sector. And whereas it is intended that the execution of the project shall be carried out on behalf of the government by the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development, and Investment, acting as executing agency, and whereas as the bank has offered the loan financing of up to US $7 million from its ordinary capital resources for the said purpose under the following terms and conditions. Lender, the Inter-American Development Bank, loan principal amount US $7 million, disbursement schedule over a period of 5 years from the date of the signature of the loan contract, loan term 25 years inclusive of 66-month grace period on principal repayment, repayment period to be repaid in 39 approximately equal semi-annual and consecutive installments of about US $179,487.18. Purpose, to execute a program that will improve the income generation capacity of artisanal fisherfolk and to maintain export levels of fisheries products while contributing to the sustainable use of commercial oceanic resources. Rate of interest. Interest will be charged on the daily outstanding balance of the loan as per SOFR-based interest rate, plus the applicable lending spread for the bank's ordinary capital loans. Credit fee. A credit fee will be charged on the undisbursed balance at a percentage to be established by the bank on a periodic basis not exceeding 0.75% per annum. And whereas under the provisions of Section 70 of the Finance and Audit Reform Act 2005, the government of Belize is required to obtain the prior authorization of the National Assembly by way of resolution for such a borrowing to take place. Now therefore be it resolved that its Honorable House, being satisfied that the loan proceeds would assist the government of Belize in its efforts to mitigate the factors that can jeopardize the fisheries sector's ability to maintain its contribution to the Belizean economy in terms of marine exports and income opportunities for fisherfolk, approves and confirms that the government may enter into a loan contract with the Inter-American Development Bank on the terms and conditions set out above, and further authorizes the Minister of Finance to execute and deliver the said loan contract and all other documents associated therewith.
I recognize Senator Antonio Herrera.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Good morning, colleagues. First of all, we're here again for another loan, $7 million, 14 million Belize dollars. Madam President, first of all, we have to note that on Section 20404, it states that this loan will be dispersed over a 5-year period, meaning that it's about 1.4 million per year. So now we're here again saying, why didn't we budget for this small amount of money? It's going to be over a 5-year period anyway. But yet we're coming again with a loan, saddling the Belizean people with another loan. My brother, even if your interest is small, we still have to pay it. Once we borrow it, we have to pay it. Therefore, we're saying, why not budget? We are in agreement that the sustainable fishing is very valuable, very important. It's very needed at this point because our fishermen are lessened with the produce that they are having at sea at this moment. So we agree with it. But what we don't agree is the loan. Why another loan? We suggest that this should be budgeted. Also, when it comes to the annex that we see here, and we are seeing 65.2% of this loan going to component 1. What is that? That is for salaries, data collection, consultancies. That's more than half of this loan that have nothing to help direct input to the fishermen of today. And now, Madam President, we say if the lobster and the conch are our two main exports of this country to our main foreign contributors, and then yet we assign 10.7 and 9.3 respectively to the conch and the lobster. Here again, that's a meager amount to be allocating to our main produce of this country. Then we go to the direct support to artisanal fisher folks, 24.1%. Artisanal fisher folks are mostly the village fishing, the small fishing industry, not having to do much with the exports of this country. It's mostly sports fishing and livelihood fishing. Therefore, we agree again that this loan should be geared more to the fishermen, the traditional fishermen of this country. We are allocating a lot of this money to Area 9, which Area 9 involves all of the blue and the 2 atolls, which we know that fishermen rarely fish there because it's just 50 to 60 feet of water, one breath to dive. Rarely anyone that's a traditional fisherman can do that. We know that Area 9 is our spawning area. We know that. And yet we are still allocating 65% to the development and the data processing, data collecting of this area. We know that, Madam President. That's not new to us. We know that. We should be investing in our fishermen. We should be investing in them because every day things get rough out there. There's nothing on this loan motion that says something for the protection of the fishermen. So sustainability, fine. So we growing the chicken for the wolf because is this regional or not? What is Honduras doing? What is Guatemala doing? Every time you hear the fishermen complaining because they come and steal our produce, the foreigners that come to steal our produce, Madam President, they don't care if it's 1.4, 2.4, 3.4. They take anything. Where is there something in this budget that will equip the fisheries department to protect our fishermen? Next thing, Area 3 and 4, 6 and 7. Those are areas that are fishing areas for local fishermen. But here what's happening, Madam President. In these areas, they are mostly shades. They are mostly shades. This is what the fishermen fish. Now, those are for the big fishermen, the ones who have money, the ones who can afford to put the shades there at the patches. They call it the patches. No, the poor fishermen cannot fish on that area because they are terrorized by the owners of the shades. They can't even come close to that area. So there is where we need to put some of this money, Madam President. We are here to defend and to protect the fishermen. We have fishermen of Sartaneja, Chunush, Copperbank, Progreso, Ranchito, Carolina, Calcutta, and Caledonia. Those are the fishermen that we need to look out for. Now, in conclusion, Madam President.
Senator Purfeet, I would ask that you kindly be reminded of Standing Order 40, that you are to maintain silence while another senator is speaking. I do understand, but let him share his comments.
Thank you, Madam President. In conclusion, we say that this loan should have benefited more to the fishermen, because, guys, if you would go on the ground with these fishermen, you would know. First of all, fuel just went up the other day again. There's no subsidizing for these fishermen, Madam President. They use fuel to come out from Sartaneja to the city where the bus is, and then from there to their areas, because every one of them have a different area where they fish. So sustainable development has been happening. This is not new. You guys don't wake up this morning and said, let's get a loan for sustainable development. That has been happening. We know how to do that. So now we say the fishermen supposed to be subsidized. Their fuel, their goods, because when they go there, they're not like us that go sleep at home and relax. They sleep at the seas. They eat at the seas. That's where their livelihood is. And every day that livelihood is being jeopardized by everyday situations on the high seas. And not only on the high seas, but now even in their fishing areas. So therefore, Madam President, I say once again that this loan needs to be geared to the fishermen and not to the office people. Because when you see on this loan, it says a maximum of 35,000 US. That's salaries for the procurement officer, for the analysts, for the data collectors. You got like 5 different in the central execution unit of this project, which is being controlled by the Ministry of Finance, right? So now when we do the math and we see at the end of the day how much is going to them that are sitting down in ACs and all this stuff, and not to the fishermen that need to get the produce out. We must remember, Madam President, that without the fishermen, we'll have no conchs, we'll have no lobster. And if we're not careful, it's a dying industry for the fishermen of this country. With that being said, Madam President, thank you very much.
I recognize Senator Christopher Cowie.
Thank you, Madam President. I think it's the same old story time and again. Time and again, same old story. And I can see why things were so bad under the past administration. It's that complete lack of vision, complete lack of vision. Thinking about today, not about tomorrow. And a lot more people eat. Now, when we look at the same old story part of things, I have to say I really appreciated the passion of Senator Herrera in his comments. the bad one.
I will ask that we refrain from referring to senators in such colorful language.
The senator other than the good Herrera, Senator Herrera. To deal with the comment that speaks to debt and borrowing, I think the central bank report was just tabled today, laid on the table today, and I would urge senators to read the report. What I would like to highlight is, take an excerpt out of it, specifically page 15 of the central bank report on total public sector debt. In 2022, Belize's total public sector debt rose by 1.2% or 49 million to 4.041 billion. This increase was due to a 49.3 million rise in external borrowings to finance ongoing and new development projects, which was partially offset by a slight contraction in central government's domestic debt. As a result, the share of external debt in the public debt portfolio climbed to by 0.5 percentage points to 67.5%, and in turn, the portion of domestic debt contracted by the same to 32.5%. However, the strong economic recovery created the public debt to GDP ratio to fall by 11.6 percentage points from 80.1% of GDP in 2021 to 68.5% of GDP in 2022, after peaking at 101.4% of GDP in 2021 owing to the pandemic fallout. So, what's been happening? You refer to this loan here as more loans, more loans. But what had been happening in the past was a bucket full of loans leading up to 2020, including 2020, but no growth. So that's why we couldn't pay the bills. That's why the past administration couldn't pay the bills. But in the functioning of a government, you're always dealing with debt. Day in, day out, you're always dealing with debt. But you have to know how to manage your debt. Clearly, the past administration had no clue how to manage debt, how to manage the public finances. This administration does. And what is critical is how you grow the economy. By growing the economy, you can have debt because you know you can pay for the debt. You can service the debt. And that's what easily we have been doing over the past several years, easily. So you don't have to be a financial guru to know that. That's just basic math. So I really would appreciate for us to hear something new rather than the same old all the time, which honestly makes no sense if you watch the numbers. When we look at now this matter of this loan, I think over the past couple of years, we all know all the effort that has been made, yes, in debt restructuring, but also in supporting the economic development, the sustainable economic development. And two key elements in that development, certainly, of course, tourism has a major role to play in that. But in the way that we focus in on development, that we do so in a sustainable manner. And so I think the Prime Minister has spoken about a conservation-led agenda. And there is much in that as far as this government is concerned and as far as the economy of Belize is concerned, we always have to put that in the forefront. how we sustainably grow this country for the long-term benefit of our children, our grandchildren, and even broader than Belize. The Blue Bond transaction had a conservation trust fund, or established a conservation trust fund. And that conservation trust fund was to support marine conservation. But in the way that we look at conservation, you can't have conservation without looking at the people. If the people and their livelihood are not addressed, then you won't have conservation. So as we look at that conservation trust fund, we look forward to a more enlightened approach in the use of the funds that form part of that conservation trust fund. An enlightened approach that contemplates the need for sustainable livelihood of the fisher folk. In the past disbursement or distribution from that conservation trust fund, most, I would say all of it, was put into hands of conservation-led projects. That's not enough. That's not enough. That's not good enough in the least. So I hope going forward that conservation trust fund will be more focused on sustainable livelihoods for the fisher folk. But we can't depend and wait on a conservation trust fund for the fisher folk and to support the fisher folk. So that's why the cabinet and this administration has been focused on making sure that all concerned are addressed and supported. This administration has enlisted the assistance of Taiwan to look at the blue spaces, and in particular the deep sea space, in terms of the assessment of fish stock. And that's an ongoing process under the Fisheries Department, or the Ministry of Fisheries. But at the same time, we have to look at how we can complement and support the fisher folk with coming up with not only more of the same and subsidy, but how do we have long-term sustainability established for the fisher folk. And that's, we all know this and we all know that. We don't know everything. And so part of where why we look at some of these loans from the MDBs, from like the Inter-American Development Bank, is for the very reason that we can pull in some of the expertise to support how we can diversify and enable fisher folk so that they don't live hand to mouth, but they can not only survive but prosper in that industry, in this industry. And that's what the goal of this loan is about, to enable the building of prosperity, particularly in the area of the fishing sector. We, as an economy, we have depended too much for too long on just one sector, two sectors. We need to diversify our economy and enable the growth in these diversified sectors of our economy. This is what this loan seeks to support, and this is why we on this side support this loan. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Michael Perfy.
Thank you, Madam President. Peasant that I am, I have to respond in this way. Senator Cowie, if you don't want to hear the same thing from this side of the Senate and from the Belizean people, the same thing over and over and over, then stop doing the same thing over and over and over and over. Because indeed, you don't need a financial genius to tell you You simply look at all the financial bills and all the supplementals and everything that we have brought here and the loans since November 2020. And Madam President, it's at $1.1 billion. That's how much this government has borrowed. So when you talk about we come here and we criticize loans, well, stop making loans. Stop borrowing money, especially since your Prime Minister likes to say unemployment that are nearly zero, and every Belizean rich, and the economy is doing that, and the economy is doing this. So then you should have more tax base and more tax revenue, that you don't need to be so hungry and so desperate to borrow $7 million US over 5 years. If you're doing so well, as my friend said, then budget for that. That's nothing in an overall sovereign national budget preparation. Why do you need to? That's like you saying you're doing well for yourself and you need to go borrow money to pay your water bill, because it is such at a low interest rate. A loan is a loan is a loan. Senator, you will out following his lead. He didn't talk about it, so why should I talk about it? I'm only responding to him. He talked about it, matter of fact, page 15 in a song book, and you read the book and you wonder, wow, only by 1% loan went up and only 49. You could define debt to GDP ratio however you want to define it. We are talking about a loan, another loan, for which we have to object, Madam President, because we don't see nothing for the loans. Name one project you have seen develop under this government for the $1.1 billion you've borrowed. Name one. I'm sorry, we only have 45 minutes, Madam President, so I can only wait 35. Name one. None. Every project that you are celebrate and every project you cut ribbons for are projects started, financed by the UDP, who you criticized before and now you want to claim it. Name one project. You know, Koya do loan with all kind of people, you know, say one shovel in the ground yet. Where is the produce of your loans? Where? We don't see it. The Belizeans don't see it. And practically, because whenever you come with these loans, about 3/4 of it is some touchy-feely, institutional strengthening, and so nobody can eat that. So when the Fisher people hear you making a loan in their name for $7 million, and they really only get about 10% of it, or 15% of it, then they have to come to us and say this can't work, because you are borrowing money and putting it in things that will produce nothing in return to pay back those loans. And if you're doing so well, forgive us if every time you come here you make a loan for something that just simply makes no sense at all. Why would you borrow the money for that? You should have the money for that. The way how you talk big, the way how you're doing so well and this and that and that, then you should have the money, $14 million Belize dollars, and it's not like the people are going to get the money right away either, Madam President. Isn't it going to be disbursed over 5 years? So now, like, when we leave the Senate today, the government has $14 million to work with. You still have to wait. So if you have to wait, you're not get the money anyway. Why make our bottom line look like this? $1.1 billion, and you're not even talking about treasury bills yet? So, Madam President, you know why we said the same thing? Then do something new, man. Come here, announce to the country that you've started some industry. You've created an enabling environment that has produced activity that can increase the tax base, so more people can be paying taxes, and you don't have to be borrowing in the people's names like this, man. It's nauseating. Every time you come here, some loan motion after loan motion. How you expect us to not say anything about that? Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I hold a slightly different view from my colleagues, Senator Perifit and Senator Herrera. There, for two main reasons, Madam President, is generally I don't have an issue with multilateral low-interest loans that are long-term, have long-term repayment periods, and so we're looking at a loan right now of 25 years, and it was borrowed to address an area in the productive sector, which is in the fishing industry. Now we all know, Madam President, that when you're looking at the extractive industries, sustainability becomes key. And why is sustainability key in these sectors, Madam President? Because we want to ensure that the persons who have lived, in this case the fisher folks, who have been doing this all their lives, probably even inherited the skills from their parents, that they'll be able to continue this lifestyle into the future. The only way this can continue, Madam President, is if we look at the sustainability aspect of it. And I'm telling you, this is an issue that is becoming more and more profound, more and more urgent in this country. I travel to San Pedro and Kikaka from time to time, and talking to the fisher people out there, they'll tell you that their catch is less and less, and their catch is smaller and smaller. What does that suggest to me, Madam President? It's suggesting that there's probably overfishing, that perhaps we weren't addressing sustainability in the manner we should have in the past. And so I think bringing in resources like this through these loan motions, I think certainly seeks to address this area, and I think we have to look more critically in other areas like this. I think that we want to ensure that we leave these industries, especially in extractive areas, as good or even better than we have found it. And I think we owe that to the other generations. And so I support the motion. Of course, I also have concern with debt in general, but from a multilateral standpoint, Madam President, with low interest, long repayment periods, especially when they're directed at the productive sector, I think this one is very justifiable, and I fully support it.
I recognize Senator Isabel Bennett.
Morning, Madam President, colleagues. Madam President, with your permission, I would like to make a few remarks as it relates to this loan motion, but relating it to a recent training that I had. So I would like really to thank Parla Americas for the invitation they had extended to the National Assembly for me to attend the 7th gathering of the Parla Americas Network on Climate Change and the 15th gathering on the Parla Americas Network for Gender Equality. This was actually held in Mexico under the exciting theme, very provocative and empowering theme, a food secure future, people building and planet-centered strategy. It was hosted by the Senate of Mexico, and we had over 50 participants from Central America and the Caribbean. What was exciting about this session was the fact that I had the opportunity to do the research and be able to participate as a panelist to focus on what Belize is actually doing as it relates to climate change, the impact it's having on our country and our food security and food sovereignty. Tying that training into what is actually before us right now was the forceful fact that not just myself but other presenters stated the need for research in all aspects throughout all ministries, especially as it relates to climate change. And so when I look at a loan motion such as this that is actually infused with having to provide finance to the fisheries industry, is an indicative marker to my mind that the government is not just responsible but responsive. Everything that we are doing in relation to the sustainable, to our two ministries, basic agriculture and the sustainable ministry, is showing that we are implementing programs and policies that are infused by research. Once we have the research, we know that all programs and policies will be able to help to implement sustainable practices. What is interesting, though, for me is the fact that having spoken to personnel from the ministry, fisheries industries really, they often share the experiences that our fisher folks have the data, and they're always ready and willing to share the data with the fisheries ministries. So from the mere fact that our personnel on the ground who are looking at getting the produce but do not have the skills mix to be able for them to implement those sustainable practices, they are there saying to us, we have the data, please come and collect it. But the government is also giving our personnel the backative that they need to collect that data to help our society to grow, to help our fisher folks to be able to practice best practices in fishing. So it's sad to hear that the critique coming from the other side is knocking down what our fishery industry is doing. We need the data to be able to inform the practices. So to have a loan that is supporting both the fisher folks as well as our professional personnel is on point. It's showing that the government is not just responsible, but as I said before, responsive. I support the loan motion.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chinona.
Good morning. And with your leave, Madam President, on behalf of the NGO community, we would also...
1 second, Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Madam President. With your leave, I'd also like, on behalf of the NGO community, to align ourselves with the statement condemning the acts of violence playing out in the Middle East. I think we are all absolutely horrified, thanks to modern media, of seeing babies being slaughtered and children amputated by missiles on a daily basis. And while we're impacted personally, I think it's also not lost on any of us that these things do not happen in a vacuum, and we might be seeing other impacts play out across our planet. So we certainly join in the call for peace and for humanitarian rights to be respected across the board. In regard to this motion, Madam President, I will contribute in this way. I think both Senators Herrera have called out that fishers know what is happening to their livelihoods. They might not have the fancy words, might not have the scientific degrees, but they know what's happening, and they know it's not spelling out to what they want to see there in terms of bounty. And they know that it's not something that they want to encourage their next generations to take on, because they know how hard it is and how much deeper they have to go and the dangers that they're subjecting themselves to. But I do want to caution against this perpetual need for data, because I think there is a lot of data here. What is not here is the action. And I think we support the purpose of this loan insofar as putting action to it, creating this environment. But please do not think for 1 second that $17 million US loan is going to play anywhere. Because as Senator Hotkay has called out, the conservation organizations of this country for decades have been soliciting grants, all sorts of financial mechanisms to support these sectors. So while it does my conservation heart good to hear the senators call this out, I want to emphasize that what we need is to take action, because to put these resources in financial terms, we are borrowing it from the next generation. But if we exhaust it, if we don't take care of these resources, we have nothing to on-lend. We have nothing to put forward. And it is critical that we don't get stuck in saying, oh, we need a research paper for this. I'm telling you, we have the data. We just have to get together and start to make decisions based on that data so that we have decisions to make. If we continue to do the same thing and expect a different result, we will be left with no choice. No choice. So as hard as whatever decisions are already here that we know we have to make, we at least have some choices left to make, but the window is closing. So that is our contribution this morning on this loan, Madam President. Thank you.
Madam President, I was hoping that I could wind up the debate on this motion with a few sentences. But the Belizean public are listening. We have students present, and I don't want them to get the wrong impression. The documents were provided to all senators, but not all senators read it. Senators got up and spoke, not having read it, and misinformed the Belizean people about what actually this loan is about. It is important, Madam President, to first of all state for the record what the objective of the loan is. It is to improve income generation capacity of artisanal fisher folk and to maintain export levels of fisheries products while contributing to the sustainable use of commercial oceanic resources. It is important to put it in context. When Hurricane Lisa hit Belize last year, the fisheries sector lost approximately $20 million. The sector lost $20 million. We have a fisheries sector that has always played an important part in the Belizean economy. And the fisher folk are saying that the catch for fish, lobster, shrimp continue to go down and harder for them to find product. Now we are blessed with beautiful waters and quite productive fishing space. But climate change and other practices, runoff through the rivers, etc., are impacting this sector. And so this government, Madam President, without shame, has decided that we need to do things differently. One, we want to increase the income of the artisanal fisher folk. Two, we want to ensure that the data that Senator Chanona says is available, and the paper, if Senator Perifit had read it, would see that it refers to both the past data that is in existence and the data that is to be collected, is going to be collected, systematized, and used in order to adopt sustainable fishing practices. And thirdly, Madam President, we have to ensure that over the long term, the ocean, the sea that we have will be able to provide a livelihood, not only for the current generation, but the future generation. Madam President, Senator Herrera from the party opposite said that he did the math. Really? Senator Perifit says that we said that 10% or 15%, I wrote it down, is directly for the fisher folk. This is a 2-piece of paper. This is not a book, 2 pieces of paper, I can't read it. If Senator Perifit had read it, If Senator Perifit had wanted to be honest and truthful, he would have read this sentence. Direct support to artisanal fisher folk, 24.1%. Not 10, not 15, 24.1%. There's a big difference, but he wouldn't understand the difference, Madam President. Calm down.
Senator Perifit, again, may I remind you that you must maintain your silence while
Let me
another
try to help
senator is speaking.
get him to understand. Read and understand. Listen carefully. Support scientific, evidence-based decision-making, better accountability to third parties, and more efficient public services provision by the Ministry of the Blue Economy and Civil Aviation and the Belize Fisheries Department. That is what we are trying to do, Madam President. And Senator Perifit, Senator Herrera might disagree, and that's fine. But this is what we intend to do. How? One, support sustainable development of fin fishing. This is an area where the data would show that there is greater resources available, and therefore we have to study and measure what is out there in order to inform the fishermen as to whether they should pursue it. Not guess, study it. Strengthen the sustainability and resilience of spiny lobster. Strengthen the sustainability and resilience of queen conch. Madam President, Senator Perifit and Senator Herrera can say all they want. Speak to any fisherman and they will tell you that in these areas, lobster and conch, it is getting more difficult for them to catch it. I was speaking to some fishermen 2 weeks ago, and they were explaining when we were going through that heat wave, that as a result of that, the sea is hotter, and therefore the lobster are going into deeper waters where the water is cooler. The current way in which our fisher folk catch lobster may have to change. And the purpose of this is to study it, to understand it, and to share that information with the fisher folk in order that they can have a sustainable and profitable livelihood. And Senator Herrera and Senator Perifit can oppose that. We will proceed to do it. If he had read and understood, and that's the part, he would understand that an important aspect of the program is to design and implement an information management system. You know information management system. You know that with that? Digitize the historical past fisheries data. Develop an implementation of a communication and outreach strategy for the program. Revamp the Fisheries Department website to improve service provision with an e-platform, e-platform, that will so that you can request and process license and permits online.
Senator
It goes one step
Perifit,
further.
I ask that you allow the Leader of Government Business to wrap up the debate on this motion.
Madam President, you know empty crocus bag empty barrel make the most nice. Keep going. Keep going. Food becomes shortly. And, Madam President, the implementation of a refrigeration system to support.
Again, Senator Perifit. I simply ask that you allow the Leader of Government Business to continue and complete his
Make a finish. Give
intervention.
me 2 minutes. implementation of a refrigeration system to support activities related to monitoring and reporting of fish landings. Madam President, as I said at the beginning, we propose to do things in an evidence-based, scientific, informed way. And let me finally touch on the direct support to the artisanal fishermen. This will include, and this is 25% of this loan, and the 25% of the loan will be based on matching grants. So you have 5,000, it will be matched. But what? What they intend to do is to ensure that all these grants are based on business plans that are viable. There is going to be training of fisher folk to help them to prepare the business plans, to help them to ensure their analysis provides an answer as to whether or not their project is viable or not, and to help them to go and get the matching grants. Why is this critical? It is critical, Madam President, because we believe that whether it is individual plans that are put forward or group plans, the matching grant is $5,000 per person. Money, 24% of this loan would go directly to the fisher folk. I close by saying this, Madam President. The one thing that we have to do in this country, in every sector, is to scientifically study the effects of climate change and extreme weather events on our agriculture and our fisheries, in fact, all sectors of the Belizean economy, and to respond to it in an evidence-based scientific way. And this is the first of more loans. Listen carefully. The first of more loans for us to support the productive sector of the Belizean economy in making the right evidence-based decisions to adjust fishing, farming practices to meet the new challenges brought on by climate change. Madam President, I want to thank the senators who had read the papers and who also support the motion. Thank you, Madam President.
Honorable members, the question is now, therefore be it resolved that this Honorable House, being satisfied that the loan proceeds would assist the government of Belize in its effort to mitigate the factors that can jeopardize the fisheries sector's ability to maintain its contribution to the Belizean economy in terms of marine exports and income opportunities for fisher folk, approves and confirms that the government may enter into a loan contract with the Inter-American Development Bank on the terms and conditions set out above, and further authorizes the Minister of Finance to execute and deliver the said loan contract and all other documents associated therewith. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bills for second reading.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, this is a self-explanatory bill. I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Firearms Act, Chapter 143 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to establish a Firearms and Ammunition Control Board, to empower the board to issue and revoke firearm licenses, certificate or permit, to reform the regulatory structure in respect of firearms and ammunition, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize Senator Michael Perfit.
Thank you, Madam President. since we'll be debating the firearms amendment. I hear my colleagues talk about the concern for Palestine and Israel. And of course, we should be all concerned about our lives, wherever they may be. But let me say that while we, as a human being, we have to be concerned about every part of the world, I think it would be remiss of us, while we are following wars and act of wars abroad, that there is terrorist activity in San Pedro, and we need to be concerned about that too, and first, since, Madam President, as they say in the Caribbean, I think it's Jamaica, the passing christening picnic first. So forgive me for worrying about Belize before I worry about any other part of the world. Having said that, Madam President, this bill may look simple, but it's anything but simple. It's the government trying to appear to do something without actually doing anything, which is about 99% of the bills that you've brought to this National Assembly. You have 99.9 then. You have essentially what the government is saying is that they no longer have the confidence in their beloved commissioner to issue gun licenses on his own. The government not trust the man no more. And so you want to replace him with a board, which on the face of it sounds good, Madam President, but we are all aware of the hackneyed saying that the devil is in the details. First of all, what you have in your mind is which board, by whom. And we were hoping that since the government wants to get the commissioner out of the way, and since in their manifesto they promised that they would pass legislation to reduce the power of ministers, you would think then that this legislation would be similar. But no. No. In the Firearms Act has certain powers of the minister that remain. So you take away the commissioner, you put in a board, but now the minister will have the same power over the board that he had over the commissioner. And the minister gets to appoint the board. What are we doing here? Which law? So change the law. Heaven, it's unfortunate you're not in power. You don't like the law, change it. Change it to be consistent with what you promised the Belizean people you would do. Change the law to make sure that you accomplish what you campaigned on, and stop the come to this parliament and to make it seem indeed like people don't read documents. We read, you know. We read, you know. And I know this is shocking you because you didn't read, but I read it for you right now. Listen to this, Madam President. A foolishness upon top foolishness. Like, remember I had this selector, they call Rick the Ruler? Speak up on top of speaker, like those big song. The Principal Act is amended in Section 2 by inserting the following term and its corresponding definition in its proper alphabetical sequence. Board means the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board. The Principal Act is amended by inserting immediately after Section 2, a body to be known as the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board is established for the purposes of this Act. The board shall be appointed by the minister. You said you would pass, I'm a teacher right now. You said you would pass legislation to reduce the powers and influence of ministers. You said you would. If you never know how to do it, you shouldn't have promised the Belizean people that. You shouldn't have told Belizean people that that's what you would do if you know you don't have the capacity to do it. As Hubert Ellerington would say, no capacity to do it, that's your problem, not mine. You promised the Belizean people you would get it done. Get it done. The board shall be appointed by the minister and comprise of the following members who have experience, training, or expertise in the area of firearms. So now, the following persons must have training in and expertise in firearms and ammunition, right? Number one, a representative of the Commissioner of Police. Fine. Fine. But that the minister won't pick the representative, you know. So the minister will pick who will represent the commissioner. Two, a representative of the magistracy. So are there magistrates who have expertise in and training and experience in firearms? Which one? A chief executive officer of the government, a CEO. Which CEO have training and expertise and experience in firearms? At least you have the decency to remove the CEO of Home Affairs. Right? So now you're broadening it now to any CEO that the minister will pick. Man, listen to me. You're saying, you know, Madam President, even if you throw the most knee-jerk of all ideas, it would still be better than the ideas that this government has. What if you were to suggest something out of the box? I heard the current commissioner who will dilute the manpower now, but I don't know, that man might turn power no. So now you have a commissioner who said that maybe a past commissioner should be on the board. But how about this? You have, if my numbers are correct, about 10 or 11. And unlike the leader of government business who claimed to be speaking to fishermen, I actually spoke to some of these past heads. You have about 10 or 11 past commissioners, commanders of the BDF, and one past commander of the Coast Guard. Why not let the board be comprised of any 3 of those past commanders on a rotating basis from time to time? Why not? They would have, certainly, when you think about only one, and only the call the man name, because he's the only former commander, so please, no, spike the man. You have John Borland, former commandant of the Coast Guard. You have several past commanders of the BDF because previously they had to retire at 45. And you have past commanders of the police department. Any one of these, the Farmer Association, and any one of those 3 people at any given time, serving maybe like they do on the PUC, a couple years at a time. Past commissioners of police, commanders of the BDF. And what you do with them, they are glad to serve. Nobody can instruct them. Nobody can scare them. No, they are fully pensioned up. They have their pension. They're fully insulated from any type of political interference. But when you have, Madam President, and it's just an idea, just one of many ideas. Oh, yes, I do. And so, instead of putting a CEO from a government, what CEO? The only person who you can see here that is protected will be a representative of the magistracy. A magistrate that should be fully tenured, should be fully independent, but still has to be chosen by the Minister of Police. Why are you doing this? It don't make no sense. This can only be done because the government, the minister, still wants to maintain control over this process. A person shall be eligible for appointment, you know this amendment. Citizen of Belize 18 years or older, and is in the opinion of the minister of high integrity and able to exercise sound judgment in the... So the minister have to have the opinion that you, whether a CEO, a representative of the magistracy, a representative of the Commissioner of Police, to put that in there, you're saying that there may be some members in the police department, some members in the magistracy, some CEOs who the minister may not have a high opinion of. When you put that piece of legislation in there, that's what you open yourself to. Now, why would you do that? Why would you do that? I hear there are moves to make the legal aid a statutory body. Make the firearm licensing like an authority, a statutory body as well. Complete and separate with its own legal identity from any government function that has to do with the executive. You're not changing anything. This is the same thing. When I want to talk, I'm a pinch you, man. Madam President, it says here now, the minister may make regulations, and then 9.3, deleting the word commissioner, and the rest of the act, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all about just simply removing the word commissioner and putting the word board. But what remains in the act, so you have now, supposedly, a protected system. No longer the commissioner. You have a board appointed by the minister, filled with members who, in the opinion of the minister, should be there, who will be deciding on gun licenses. However, there's a piece of the legislation that was not amended. That's not here. You see, Madam President, I keep saying, if you look at section 3.4 of the current act, that's not being brought for amendment. It says very clearly that the minister will still be the person who will be responsible for amending the table of costs. So the minister still can unilaterally decide if it should be $75 or $150. Why can't that come with a recommendation from the board or with the consent of the board? Why appoint these people to these positions, give them all that authority, require them to have all that expertise, then don't depend on their expertise? I don't understand that. Why leave that in? Section 4.2. You got your act file? Under this, the power still remains with the minister to revoke gun dealers' licenses. You right, you see? We never amend it. 4.2. So with all this power, we're going to supposedly the gift to the board, the minister still has the authority to revoke gun dealers' licenses. What's the point of a board? Huh? What is the point of a board? This should be left to the board. This should be put to the board. Section 7.3. Now this is the best one, Madam President. This is the best one. 7.3 reads like this. It says, Madam President, you apply currently, you apply to the commissioner today, and the commissioner refuses to give you a license. 7.3 says, any person aggrieved by the refusal of the commissioner of police to grant him a license may by petition in writing to the minister pray that the commissioner of police be directed to grant him a license, and the minister may, after such inquiry as he may think fit, grant the prayer and direct the commissioner of police to grant such license. In that section, the only thing you amend is the word commissioner. So this is how the law will now read. When you blindly vote to support this bill, it will read this way. Any person aggrieved by the refusal of the board to grant him a license may by petition in writing to the minister pray that the board be directed to grant him a license, and the minister may, after such inquiry as he may think fit, grant the prayer and direct the board to grant such a license. Under this amendment, Papa, the minister can override the board, all because you hurriedly hurriedly try to make this amendment to feed the public that you're doing something, but you're not doing anything. Because the board will have no authority over the minister. So why put the board there then? Why? It makes no sense. How can the minister override a 3-person board? Just override the board with no reason. And yet you say you pass laws because you promised when you were campaigning that you would reduce the influence and powers of ministers when you come to government. This is a direct indication that you're doing just the opposite. You have not done that at all. You've kept on ministerial powers and increased them when you can, except for course when the Financial Action Task Force instructs you to remove ministers where it says ministers sometimes, but that cannot fly. How can that fly? That don't make no sense. And it's the same thing. The minister will determine who can prohibit, when and where he or she can prohibit the carrying of firearms in Belize at certain times. The minister, so we have on board for. The exceptions to the prohibitions is left to the minister. So we'll have on board for. The registration of bulletproof vests and the times, and you can still reside with the minister. And overriding by minister and Madam President, there is more, you know. There is a lot more. What's the point of having a board if the minister can override the board? It makes no sense. And if anybody who was in charge of policy would have recognized that, would know that that doesn't make any sense. Madam President, let me just crave your indulgence to verify something here very quickly. Now, yes, Madam President, that is my overall position. You are appointing a board to replace the commissioner. But the minister's powers over the board remains as it did when the minister had the same power over the commissioner. So you're changing nothing. Instead of being able to have powers over one person, now the minister will have powers over 3 persons. Section 4.2, a gun dealer's license granted under this section may be revoked by the minister, and no subsequent gun dealer's license shall be granted without the consent of the minister to any person whose gun dealer's license has been at any time revoked. Why leave that to the minister? Leave that to the board. We will hear the personal attacks now, Madam President. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Madam President, thank you. Madam President, I too went over the bill and had similar concerns as raised by Senator Perifit. With respect, we agree sometimes. The bill generally, Madam President, as the Senator said, is basically to replace the commissioner with a board, a 3-member board. I think that's very clear, and this board now is to approve applications, among other things, and it lays out the functions of that board. But there's not much different with respect to what had existed before, other than this fundamental change. And I think one of the reasons why this bill became necessary, Madam President, is because of what we've been seeing on the news recently. I think that there's been many reports about gun licensing being issued. In some cases, multiple licenses to the same person. and then others who believe that they should and should be qualified to get a license are rejected for some reason or the other. And so looking at this amendment bill, this was one of the things that I was hoping would have been addressed in the bill, the fairness aspect of it. Like for example, it doesn't state at all who qualifies for a firearm license. It doesn't state what will qualify them for a firearm license. And I think this is what led to the unfairness in terms of how it was being practiced. And then if you don't agree, or if you don't agree that you've been disqualified fairly, then who do you appeal to? I noticed that 2DG, I believe, states that one of the functions of the board will be causing to be conducted reviews of the issuance and denials of license. Madam President, I went to the Principal Act and I looked at whether or not there was an appeals process. I didn't really see one, but if this appeal was to the commission, I know the commission is being replaced by a board, and then the board is the person who should approve the license, then basically you'd be appealing to the same person who disapproved your application. And so I think this is probably an area that should be looked at, unless somewhere in the Principal Act that I missed, and I was looking through it, that there's an appeals process. But I think that, again, if we want to address the issue of fairness in this bill, as well as I think we need to address, I'm not saying it addressed, but it would have been nice to establish whether or not a license for a firearm is a right or a privilege. Whatever it is, I think that there should be some fairness built into the process, and I think a part of that has to be that a person can contest a disapproval if one is given, and I don't see a process for that. I think that basically covers the bill, Madam President. I think, like I mentioned, there's not a whole lot to it other than that the board now replaces the commission. And there's one other thing, Madam President, I think that should be established. I know that there are 3-member board, magistrate, someone being appointed from the magistrate, a CEO, and then someone from the Commissioner of Police. But those persons, the magistrate I know is not directly in government, but we could say related because they come from the judiciary. It would have been nice, I think, to have an outside person within this group, someone representing some organization that may have an interest in looking at this type of thing. And so to expand the transparency aspect of it, I think that would have been a good addition to the board. And so that may be something that hopefully can be looked at as we're going forward. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chanono.
Thank you, Madam President. We offer one suggested amendment in aligning with the, I don't know if we would use the fairness aspect, but certainly the accountability aspect. I will share that we were at a public function and there was an icebreaker, and you were given 2 envelopes, and the first envelope says, you find an envelope of money on the windshield of your car in the parking lot. What do you do? put it in your car or you give it to the security booth. So you filled out your response. And then you open the second envelope. You find an envelope on the windshield of your car, but there's a security camera that has you in its gaze. All of a sudden, certain people that chose one way, like putting it in the car, chose differently. We therefore suggest that there be some mechanism for accountability and transparency in making sure that whoever is making these decisions, be it the minister, be it the board, be it the commissioner of police, that be subject to public scrutiny, so that it does not have to take an incident of violence like murder or otherwise to find out that one person has 9 licensed weapons or otherwise. It should be that we know who is licensed to carry, who is not licensed to carry, and that should add a level of accountability so that whoever is making decisions know that there is that accountability to come. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Bevington Carr.
Good morning, Madam President. Madam President, coming from the rural communities of Belize, we have a lot of farmers, and they raised a lot of, well, some issues when it comes to this bill, because they thought that in Section 5, subsection 5, every renewal requires a certificate from a firearms instructor, Madam President. But in subsection 6, it's clear also that, and I will read it just, for clarity, Madam President, so that our farmers really know that they won't need that certificate from the instructor. And I'll read it, Madam President. So in section 5, subsection 6, it states, notwithstanding subsection 5, a person applying for the renewal of a farm gun license is exempt from providing a certificate of competence at the time of renewal, Madam President. So I think this is important for us to have our farmers informed that this bill won't really affect them, Madam President. Thank you.
Madam President, I want to make very clear. As has been said, the bill is in response to certain disclosures that have been occupying the media waves for some time. And so the purpose of the legislation is to remove a single person from having extensive powers in licensing and revoking firearms, and to create a board and to have that board address those issues. And that is why the bill has very limited scope. It was not intended to address the issues raised by Senator Perifit and I believe Senator Herrera, meaning putting in an appeal procedure, etc., and the other sections that Senator Perifit, I believe he referred to 344273 that were not amended. When and if the Firearms Act in its entirety will be reviewed and revised, those are comments which I think may be legitimate and can be taken on board. This bill is designed at this stage to address a problem, and that is what the government would like to have passed, removing the power from the commissioner and giving it to the board. I would commend the bill to senators on that basis, that the concerns raised are legitimate, but go beyond the scope of what government was intending to do at this stage. I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Firearms Act, Chapter 143 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to establish the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board, to empower the board to issue and revoke firearm licenses, certificate or permit, to reform the regulatory structure in respect to firearms and ammunition, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Firearms Act, Chapter 143 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to establish the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board, to empower the board to issue and revoke firearm licenses, certificate, or permit, to reform the regulatory structure in respect to firearms and ammunition, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to make provisions for trade licensing, to repeal the Trade Licensing Act, Chapter 66 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize Senator Beverly Williams.
Thank you, Madam President. This is not the first time I am seeing this bill, Madam President. This bill was sent back to the Ministry of Labor and Local Government because of its very onerous nature. This bill, Madam President, is a true representation of the Creole proverbs. You pick till you pick pork knuckle. As Senator Perifeet keeps saying, you pick up everything that was there before. And you pick up this one, and I'm certain that even if they read it, then I know I will be scolded by Senator Courtney. They never read it. I am pretty certain. Nothing is creative, nothing is innovative about it. It was in the Prime Minister's presentation on the budget, Madam President, that he said there's no taxes in this one. But what is this, Madam President, if it's not a tax? A tax on the poor people with the already high cost of living. When you resort to taxing the peddlers, then you know something is very, very wrong. All the peddlers will do is to add that tax onto their cost, and the cost of living keeps going up. Panades gone up. When I bite last week, I couldn't share it. But, Madam President, within the concept of taxation, it is always there where some levels of exemptions are provided. Some categories, because when you look at the peddlers and you look at the small man, it is very burdensome on any administration to manage that. So, Madam President, it is the peddlers who sell today so they can eat tomorrow. If we go directly to the Act, Madam President, Section 3, it says to allow the local authority to regulate the conduct of trade in its respective jurisdiction. And then switch all the way to Section 45. And I know my colleague here will enjoy this one. It says that the local authority will regulate, but in 45 it says the minister may make rules regulating and prescribing the procedure on appeals. There's the appeal, but it is for the minister. Okay? And then, moving along, Madam President, Section 410 of the Act, Section 7.6. And for completeness, Section 410 says the Rural Development Officer shall be the clerk of the Trade Licensing Board. And then Section 7.6, the Village Administrator shall be the clerk of the Trade Licensing Board. No, Madam President, experience tells me Village Administrator. Who is that? We know the loopholes that are there, that were there, and this makes no provision to cover those loopholes. There's no structure. It seems that we're expanding the revenue stream, creating more revenue for the town councils and the village councils, but there are no structures to say how they will manage this money. We know, and I know from experience, that monies are not being managed properly at the village council and even at the town and city council level. And so I see nothing in the act that says that these structures will be put in place after you having expanded the revenue stream and again a tax on the people of Belize. Madam President, if you permit me, I will look at section 18. It says again, 18.3, the annual license fee shall be paid to the local authority for municipal areas and Treasury Department for the rural licensing districts. Again, Madam President, experience tells me when the village councils looking for their money, you go to the Treasury, and the Treasury say, go and find your receipts and bring it, and then I can put it together and I can then send it to rural development to afford you your money. I see no new structure to fill that loophole. Again, we just pick up something and never read it. Section 19 again, they never read it, Madam President. Section 19, it says, the annual license fee payable in respect of carrying on a trade shall be determined in accordance with the trade matrix declared under Section 22. Let's read Section 22. Section 22 says, where any person who is liable to pay any fee assessed by the board fails to do so within 30 days, the notice of assessment, the magistrate of the judicial district in which it traded, absolutely nothing to do with the matrix. I'm quoting the wrong section, Madam President. So they never read it. It should be, if we look on it, maybe I shouldn't say which section it should be, right?
No, it's fine, man. Help me.
It should be Section 20. But here it's saying Section 22.
What section now?
Section 19 is saying it shall be in accordance with the trade matrix in 22, but 22 is not talking about trade matrix at all. Right? Section 19.4. Notwithstanding subsection 1, a business license in a village shall pay a flat fee to be made by regulations. This bill, Madam President, is speaking directly to the Kikaka Village Council, and I believe it's also being piloted in the Kayo district. A flat fee, and I don't want Kikaka to think I'm targeting them, but even in the Kayo district. So this flat fee will go to these high-rise hotels that we see in Kikaka, and the peddlers on the ground will pay the same fee that they pay. That's what it says. There shall be a flat fee. Business license in a village. Kikaka is a village. Right? Section 23. 2. It says if the applicant, it's speaking to the appeals process, whenever any board in subsection 1 has stipulated an assessed fee in respect of any application and the applicant is dissatisfied with the assessment, the applicant may, within 10 days of notice of the assessment, serve a written notice of appeal therefrom upon the board and upon the National Trade License Appeal Board. And then subsection 2, if the applicant does not pay the assessed fee within the stipulated time, his appeal shall be dismissed. If you allow me a minute, Madam President. The bottom line is, Madam President, that this has been ruled in the court. There's a similar provision. I see Senator Courtney laughing because the Business Tax Act, and it was challenged in the court, and Justice Courtney Abel ruled that it is offensive because it does not provide due process to the applicant. And they struck out that portion. Well, I don't want to. I'm not certain who was the liar in that case, but he struck it out, so it is. This one seemed to be quite.
Let Senator Beverly Williams have silence as she make her intervention. Senator Perfy. But let her have
Lastly,
the time
Madam President, I won't belabor it, but maybe Senator Herrera might like this one. Section 35, the good Senator Herrera. Section 35(1) says every person who carries on a business of a commercial traveler in any tongue shall obtain a license from the board of that tongue for doing so and pay the prescribed fee. Subsection 2. Every person who carries out such business without first obtaining shall commit an offense. But if we go to Schedule 1, I believe. Let's find Schedule 1.
Look at you, read that thing.
Says.
You may know you have a schedule? You may know you have a schedule?
The commercial, it outlines in Schedule 1, of course, where it previously prescribed the 3 areas in the Cayo district. A commercial traveler, each time they go to a village, will pay that annual fee. This is what it gives the appearance here. So we would need clarification. A distributor goes to Armenia, to Kamalote, to Cotton Tree, to St. Matthew's Village, to Tea Kettle. So, again, those businesses will pay the prescribed fee in each village. This is what it is saying here. Look, every person who carries on the business of a commercial traveler in any tongue shall obtain a license from the board of that tongue for so doing and pay the prescribed fee. And so then the distributor moves from Belize and goes to the tongue and distribute. You'll pay the fee there. You go to the other one, you'll pay the fee there. You go to the other one, you'll pay the fee there. You go to the next one, you'll pay. This is expanding, as I said, Madam Speaker, revenue stream for the tongue boards, for the village councils with no accountability, no structure. Nothing is there, and there are so many other inconsistencies in the bill. Obviously, they did not read it, Madam Speaker, and of course, you'd like to see those corrections before anybody should agree to the bill. I thank you, Madam President. Sorry for saying.
I would have extended your time.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I agree there are all sorts of issues and problems with this bill. I think generally we can agree that the bill is needed and it had to be redone at some point. I just think that there are some specific issues that have to be addressed, and hopefully the leader of government business can send it to committee and we can address some of the issues in there. I'll start out on page 5 of the bill, Mr. President, and I'll go to the definition of productive footprint. And if I may read the definition, Mr. President, it means the square footage of the premise where the business is conducted exclusive of common areas of the premises, such as agricultural lands, lobbies, restrooms, stairwells, customer parking, storerooms, and shared hallways, except where these areas are used as part of the business for profit. Now that definition, Mr. President, really brings in a lot of discretion into it. And if you want to exempt or leave out restrooms, hallways, and that type of thing, then do so. Because it doesn't give any type of guidelines in terms of when those would be included in terms of the calculation of the fee or when it will not. And this is, of course, is related to section, let me see, section Section 19, yes. Section 19.3. Subsection 3. And this would be the calculation of the fee that would be payable. And again, you're seeing the new bill coming out, Madam President, but you really don't see, we're really not seeing any type of departure from the past in terms, it's still based on rental fee. And so if you're in an area, and let's say Senator Koi moves his law practice on your street, it may immediately impact how your fee is calculated. And that's no fault of yours. You may say, well, yeah, the value of your property goes up. But then if you're not in the business of real estate and you don't intend to sell or to benefit from that increased appraisal, then you're really stuck with a higher trade licensing fee. That's not the quarrel, Mr. President. I'll go on. The other definition, right on in the definition section, tongue. Tongue means, in C, any village declared under the Village Council Act. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Because then a town is not a village and a village is not a town. I think that's certainly an area I think should be addressed. And then we move on, Mr. President. To section 6 of the bill. And we're looking at the board, the makeup of the board. And there are 5 representatives on that board, and I won't list each of them, but you're looking at the mayor, such as the mayor, a member of the council, which are ex officio, and 3 other members. But if these town councils and these villages, these are come under the Ministry of Local Government, then wouldn't you expect that some representation would be there from local government for transparency part of it, but also for the accountability part of it? Because they report directly to the Ministry of Local Government, or the commander, the Ministry of Local Government. I would certainly think that that would certainly be an improvement to what is here in terms of the persons who are appointed on that board. And similarly again in section 7, that in the composition of that board as well, when you're looking at the board for Kikaka and the local authority, I think a representative from the local government again should be up there. Now, Mr. President, in section, and I want to go over this because I think this is a huge issue. Section 9, subsection 5. And I'll read that in conjunction with section 10.1 and 2. Section 9.5, the board will grant automatic approval for defined classes of business listed in Schedule 8. Remember, the board shall grant automatic approval. Remember that. Now in 10.2, it's saying a board shall only meet to consider applications for business types not granted under Schedule 8. It doesn't make any sense. Because, well, firstly, in 9.5, if it's an automatic approval, then why is the board needed for it? But then it says that the board will grant approval. But then in 2 it says that the board will only meet to approve applications that were not under Schedule 8. And so that seems to be, so if the board shall approve Schedule 8, but they won't meet to approve Schedule 8, how will they be approved? And then in 10.1, again, the board meets quarterly. This has always been an issue because sometimes people submit their applications and they have to wait 3-4 months for the board to meet. And I know that there's a workaround in this in terms of you can pay a fee and you could expedite it, but again, it might be something that can be looked at as we're reviewing the bill. And then we go on, Mr. President. There are no definitions, and if we look at 18.3, the annual license fee shall be paid to the local authority for municipal areas and Treasury Department for rural licensing districts, but there are no definition for what is a municipal area and what is a rural licensing district. So there's a vagueness here, and again, I think that these bills should be written in a way where people can pick them up, read them, and understand. An ordinary person. But there are no definitions for these 2 areas. Again, I think that that could be an improvement to the current bill if a definition is put in there. I think I had addressed 19 with the fee payable and the productive footprint already, but we go on to section 23, Mr. President, and if I may read it. Whenever any board has stipulated an assessed fee in respect of any application and the applicant is dissatisfied with the assessment, the applicant may, within 10 days of notice of the assessment, serve a written notice of appeal therefrom upon the board and upon the National Trade Licensing Board. If the applicant does not first pay the assessed fee within the stipulated time, his appeal shall be dismissed. Again, there were, I think Senator Castillo mentioned, and it's true, that there was a case in front of the Supreme Court. I think it was Belize International Services Limited versus the Attorney General and the Commissioner of Income Tax. I think it was Claim 425 of 2013. And it sought to address the same issue and whether or not me having to pay a fee that I don't agree with and I'm contesting, I have to pay it before I can qualify to appeal. And the question in that case was whether or not that's a contravention of the fundamental rights afforded under sections 6 and 17 of the Constitution to due process of law and protection against unlawful deprivation of property. Now, in that case, Mr. President, the court said that it was the assessment was unlawful, so they didn't really get to the constitutional aspect of it. But I spoke to Senator Courtney a little earlier, and I think he mentioned to me that this is settled in perhaps another case, and so I'm hoping that he'll be able to enlighten us a little more on this. But again, I'm sure that it was I'm sure that it was something that was dealt with before. And hopefully, again, I think we should, if this is something that has been settled, then we need to take it out of the bill. There's no reason why it should be in there again. Again, I think it's discriminatory, and it's certainly a contravention of our rights under the Constitution. One of the things we're seeing in this bill, Mr. President, is when members are selected for these boards, nowhere in these bills I'm seeing where it's saying that the organization will nominate a person to be appointed on these boards. It's always that the minister will appoint. And so they'll select a representative of a registered business organization. But it doesn't state which business organization, and there are several boards that are mentioned in the bill. I think it's very vague. I think it's open for the minister to select his favorite representative from a business organization, a realtor, or evaluators, or one of his favorites from the justices of the peace. Again, if we're looking at strengthening these bills as we're going forward, Mr. President, I think it's important that if a business organization has a representative up there, that person should be selected by that organization, not necessarily by a minister who may pick and choose whoever he wants to approve or who he feels will be carrying out his wishes on that board, especially when it's an oversight board. The next point I wanted to raise, Mr. President, is similar to Schedule 2, and where there's an application for license for new trade. I believe that there should be a schedule where someone should be able to cancel should request cancellation of their trade license, simply because if this is not done in a timely way and the assessments are done, then it imposes a liability on that person until they can fix that process. To me, it would certainly facilitate. It would certainly facilitate cancellation so that you don't get into that type of problem with the city or town councils. And there's one other, the last area I'd like to address, Mr. President, is really in the area of e-business operators. Who is an e-business operator? I mean, we see all these businesses operating on social media, and some are regular, some really that's their business, but then some people go up there very periodically to sell an item that they may have that they may not have any use of, or they want to get some extra cash or something. Would those be considered an e-business, and would they need to be registered? And so those are some of the cleaning up I think we need in the bill, Madam President, Mr. President, I'm sorry. I'm hoping that the leader of government business will be able to send this bill to committee so that perhaps we can discuss these issues a little more. Thank you, Mr. President.
Madam President, I will be brief. The intention of this legislation is to empower the local government, both at the town and city level, as well as the village level. Additionally, the intention is to give them a clearer and more consistent stream of income. This is a commitment that was made by the government in Plan Belize. It is clear that there are a number of errors, sections that are cited that need to be corrected. Senator Herrera and Senator Williams raised some issues of policy which can possibly be looked at and considered. And therefore, Madam President, we on this side have agreed that the bill should remain in committee for consideration and possibly amendment before the question is put. And therefore, Madam President, I ask that the bill be kept in committee, sent to committee. Madam President, the clerk is correcting me and saying that we should move the second reading, ask that the question be put, and then it is sent to committee for the amendments, and then comes out with the amendment. So I ask that the question be put. Yeah.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to make provision for trade licensing, to repeal the Trade Licensing Act, Chapter 66 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor kindly say aye. Aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to make provision for trade licensing, to repeal the Trade Licensing Act, Chapter 66 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act, number 4 of 2023, to replace the definition of MSME and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, this amendment is ordered to bring the definition of MSME in line with certain international best practices for access to loans and other grants. MSMEs need to have, the definition needs to be consistent with what is used in international financial organizations, multilateral banks, and so on. So we're just amending the definition to make it consistent in order to allow MSMEs to access finance.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
I'll be very brief on this, Madam President. While I support the bill, Madam President, I just think that there needs to be a clarification. If you look at Section 3 of the bill, it's really extending the amnesty period. It's really extending the amnesty period from July 31st to October 31st, 2024. My question is, for those who fell or didn't meet the July 31st deadline, there seems to be a gap between July 31st and October 31st. And so what happens to those persons who may have been affected within that period of time? I think a clarification in that area would be very helpful. Thank you, Madam.
Senator Christopher Cowie, I recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam President, really I rise just to address the query raised. Maybe I'm not understanding it clearly enough, but this in effect has a retroactive effect because the cutoff was July 31st, or is July 31st currently, where you can, or you could have gained the benefits provided for under the Act. What this bill is doing is to move that cutoff date from July 31st, 2023 to October of next year. So those that were not captured are actually now captured, those that pass July 31st. Sorry? Right, but because of this amendment, you're not disallowed anymore. So yes, you can go back. So I hope that makes it clear. But generally, on this bill, just to say that one, there are really two objectives. The provision on the MSME and the definition for MSME is really just being broadened to come more in line with international standard. What that actually will do is to support the DFC in its access to financing for MSMEs, which they were procured from the IDB. It was about 15 million US a couple years ago, and there are limitations based on the current definition of MSME. So it will broaden that a bit. And then in terms of that second provision, this actually was something that was raised by the business community. We had meetings with the chamber in particular, but broader than that, for us to expand this amnesty, it's seen as a very positive action to enable small business to formalize, become part of the formal sector, pay their taxes, and operate in a legal format. However, the timeline, with the deadline being July 31st, was seen as being too tight, and so we didn't have enough awareness of an awareness campaign. The chamber has offered to participate with the government to help educate and bring more people aware so that they can participate and become formalized. Thank you.
President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act number 4 of 2023 to replace the definition of MSME and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act, Act number 4 of 2023, to replace the definition of MSME and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of an act to amend the Referendum Act, Chapter 10 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the circumstances in which a referendum shall be held and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, this bill seeks to implement an undertaking given to Oceania to give them government's assurance and now legislative assurance that there will be a referendum before there is any type of activity related to oil exploration or extraction in the maritime space of Belize.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chanona.
Good morning, Madam President. I thank the Leader of Government Business for his reference, but truly I rise in support of the people's call to be consulted, and I'm glad we're here where we are today. I think we all appreciate that the Referendum Act is a key pillar of our democracy, a way for people to talk to their governments in between elections. I myself, from this floor, have advocated in the past for referenda to be regular exercises, and I still hold that view. But truly, these amendments here are validation that the people of Belize want to have a conversation about offshore oil and anything that would happen in the future there and want to participate fully in that. So I really want to begin by thanking everyone who signed the petition. 22,090 registered voters signed that petition, and truly we are here because they stood up to be counted on this. So it's really and truly, and I know men, women, and youth are in that population of people, but also to underscore that it was a call, a demand, an urging throughout, repeated and reiterated, that this want for involvement is there, and I am happy that that was heard, as the Minister in presenting this to the House said, message received, and that it has been respected. And I think that is a sign of leadership, and we certainly will do our part to make sure that it will be promoted as an opportunity for an example for others to follow, and truly setting precedent in a way that I think is appropriate. And so in recognizing those people who stood up to be counted, I also want to fully acknowledge that some people are not happy that we're not going to a vote right now, and they've let me know that, and I want to acknowledge it and recognize it, but also to highlight that the amendments that are before the Senate today is a commitment that a vote will happen. And so I also take this opportunity for to remind everyone that when that vote happens, if the government would want to do anything in the future with offshore oil, that they need to participate as well for that. But it also reminds me that while the previous exercise that was called the People's Referendum was unofficial, that this vote will in fact be the official People's Referendum if it were to pass, and I think that's an appropriate language that we can advocate jointly on. And I thank all the allies that have supported the effort throughout. But also in very practical terms to say that I don't think, while there's a dispute and none of us wanted to capitulate on our respective legal positions, that it is really and truly that we were able to, as again communicated, talk to each other about this and make sure that in terms of supporting the commitment of the government of the day, not to, as the amendment says, expressly or impliedly repeal without the consent of the people of Belize. I think that is, again, to be commended. And certainly I think that I don't see how, because again it has been expressed to me, how what happened here can set any precedent for any future petitions being handled in this way. And I want to personally promote to anyone feeling that way that I don't think that would be to anyone's benefit, certainly not any government to handle petitions that way, because I think it would send a negative message, certainly in terms of, again, this conversation that I believe should be free-flowing between peoples and their elected representatives. So I would like to denounce that thought, and anyone that would be feeling that way, that this does not set a precedent, but certainly, as I said, it is in respect to the call for consultation. And I also want to take this opportunity, as we had discussed earlier, to again commend the Briceño administration for taking on the constitutional reform exercise. And similarly, in terms of this, in respect of the demand to be consulted, that exercise is one of the most important ways that Belizeans can participate in being consulted in a very important, perhaps once in a lifetime exercise. And I really want to support all those who are encouraging full participation of Belizean men, women, our young youth parliamentarians are leading the charge, but certainly youth overall are also participating. But just really and truly to wholeheartedly encourage all Belizeans to see that opportunity for what it is and to embrace that opportunity fully for their meaningful consultation and participation. Thank you.
Madam President, lest there be any misunderstanding, the Briceño administration has never said that there would not be a referendum on this issue. The government of the day has, in writing and by spoken word, given its undertaking that before there is any exploration or any extraction in the maritime space, there will be consultation by referendum with the people. Madam President, this reminds me of something that a judge would say occasionally. You're pushing against and pushing very hard against an open door. The law, as Senator Perifit alluded to just now, prevents any exploration or extraction in the maritime space. That's what the law is at the moment. There has not been any request or application by anyone to do any maritime exploration. The Briceño administration has said, in compliance with the law, that it will not grant any license for this to be done. So, the fact that Oceania wants a referendum on this issue and possibly an amendment to the Constitution to prohibit that type of activity in the maritime space. Those things will be dealt with as part of the consultation process on the People's Constitutional Commission. So, just to be clear, there is no dispute between the government of Belize and Oceania on protecting the maritime space of Belize from oil exploration and extraction unless and until the people of Belize say something different. Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Referendum Act, Chapter 10 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the circumstances in which a referendum shall be held and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Referendum Act, Chapter 10 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the circumstances in which a referendum shall be held and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Committee of the Whole Senate on Bills and Motions.
Before we proceed with the Committee of the Whole Senate on Bills and Motion, I recognize Senator representing the National Trade Union Congress, who made a request to speak, Honorable Senator Luis Luke Martinez.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Before I go into this matter, Madam President, I'd just like to state that the National Trade Union Congress stands with the government of Belize in calling for peace between Israel and Palestine. I also want to take this opportunity, Madam President, to recognize our future leaders in the gallery and that they take these assignments very seriously and that they're taking notes. Madam President, in accordance with the standing orders, Madam President, we rise to speak on a matter of urgent and national importance. And our concern, not only today but for a while, is the Occupational Health and Safety Bill that needs to be enacted now. Madam President, we have been meeting with the Minister responsible for Labor, whose ministry has the mandate to ensure that this bill goes to Cabinet, that it comes to the National Assembly, so that we approve the legislation. For every day that we continue to ignore the fact that health and safety is not important, we have workers in this country who continue to fall to their deaths and to serious injuries. Madam President, we met with the Prime Minister a few months ago, and he has given us his commitment that in September, this government would have tabled the OSH. Madam President, we are in October. A life was lost a day ago. Someone is in hospital right now, Madam President, because of negligence at the workplace. Sorry cannot bring back a life. Meaningless compensation cannot bring back a life, Madam President. But if we ensure that there is safety in the workplace, we will save lives. I must, for the record, state, Madam President, that the National Trade Union Congress and Chamber, we have been working, in fact, we have worked tirelessly on the bill, both the BCCI and NTUCB. As a matter of fact, we've included the Ministry of Labor, a representative from the Ministry of Labor, which means that we had tripartite representation During that exercise, Madam President, we jointly wrote to the Minister of Labor, BCCI, and NTUCB in December to explain to the Minister that, look, this is what we have worked on, this is our conclusion, and we're hoping that we'll be able to get this bill enacted. It took the Minister 6 months to respond to us, to tell us that they have sought legal advice and they will have to go through a whole new process. While it took him 6 months, Madam President, we have workers who died. After that 6 months, it took him another 3 months to say, okay, let's sit down and let's discuss how we could advance this legislation. The Minister has given us now a 2 months commitment that will see the bill advance from his ministry to Cabinet and then to the National Assembly. But I reminded the Minister responsible for Labor, I am reminding the Prime Minister and his Cabinet and this Senate that for every day we ignore that fact, for every day we ignore the fact that workers need to be protected, that employers are protected and that customers are protected, Madam President, for every day we ignore that fact, we will continue to bury workers. We will continue to have workers hospitalized. So for God's sake, let's rush the OSH. Thank you very much, Madam President.
And just again, before we move to the committee as a whole, I believe our youth parliamentarians have been sitting down patiently, viewing your performance today, perhaps getting some tips as to what they will be doing come Friday, November the 10th. And so I think it is only appropriate at this time that I recognize our youth parliamentarians before we move into committee, as the gallery will have to be cleared. So when I call you, if you're here, I am hopeful that most, if not all of you are here. I will just ask if you rise so that your counterpart can recognize who will be representing them come November the 10th. You wanted some over there? Senator Kira Herrera, who will be representing the Honorable Janelle Chanona, NGO organizations. Is she here? Senator Claire Alamia, representing the Honorable Bishop Alvin Bengusher, Belize Council of Churches and Evangelical Association of Churches. Senator Miguel Petch, representing the Honorable Elena Smith National Trade Union Congress. Senator Brianna Orozco, representing the Honorable Kevin Herrera, Belize Chamber of Commerce. Senator Brandon Isagiri, representing the Honorable Antonio Herrera. Senator Jaira Sebastian, representing the Honorable Beverly Williams. Senator Herman Punjabi, representing the Honorable Michael Perifit. Senator Lisani Castillo, representing the Honorable Bevington Cal. Senator Janae Riverol, representing the Honorable Erica Jang. Senator Richard Martinez, representing the Honorable Christopher Cowie. Senator Fernanda Castillo, representing the Honorable Isabel Bennett Moody, Senator Sole Main, representing the Honorable Amon Courtney, Leader of Government Business, Senator the Honorable Carleen Tun, representing the Vice President of the Senate, Honorable Colette Montejo, and representing the President of the Senate is Emerson Tizalam. So thank you to our youth parliamentarians. We hope you enjoyed today's session, and I believe we want to do a photo op, and we would love to do that immediately after the Senate, on the stairs of the National Assembly. Honorable members, in accordance with Standing Order 68A, the Senate will now resolve itself into the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee, a committee of the whole Senate, to consider the motions referred to it, and thereafter, in accordance with Standing Order 54, the committee of the whole Senate to consider the bills that were read a second time. Honorable members, I will now take the chair as the chairperson of the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee, and then as the chairperson of the Committee of the whole Senate.
Madam President, the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee has met and considered the resolution authorizing the accession by Belize to the agreement establishing the Caribbean Customs Organization and on mutual administrative assistance in customs matters, motion 2023, and has considered the resolution authorizing the ratification of the agreement on the return or sharing of recovered assets, motion 2023, and has agreed that they both be returned to the Senate for adoption. I therefore move that the question be put in relation to both resolutions.
Honorable members, the question is, now therefore be it resolved that this Honorable Senate authorizes the government of Belize to accede to the agreement establishing the Caribbean Customs Organization and on mutual administrative assistance in custom matters, a full text of which is here to annex, and therefore be it resolved that this Honorable Senate, having examined the said agreement, that agreement being the resolution authorizing the ratification of the agreement on the return or sharing of recovered assets, motion 2023, authorizes the government of Belize to ratify the agreement on the return or sharing of recovered assets, the full text of which is here to annex. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Reporting on third reading of bills.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I rise to report that the Committee of the Whole Senate has considered the Firearms Amendment Bill 2023, the Fiscal Incentives Amendment Bill 2023, and the Referendum Amendment Bill 2023, and passed them without amendment. I therefore move that the bills be read a third time.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Firearms Act, Chapter 143 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to establish the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board to empower the Bureau to issue and revoke firearm license, certificate, or permit, to reform the regulatory structure in respect to firearms and ammunition, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. That an act that the bill for an act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act, Act Number 4 of 2023, to replace the definition of MSME and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. That the bill for an act to amend the Referendum Act, Chapter 10 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the circumstances in which a referendum shall be held and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, all be read a third time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Firearms Act, Chapter 143 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020. Bill for an act to amend the Fiscal Incentives Act, Act Number 4 of 2023, and the Bill for an act to amend the Referendum Act, Chapter 10 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn.
Honorable members, the question is that the Senate do now adjourn. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it. The Senate now stands adjourned.